So our first session is going to be governance for councils, commissions, and boards. This is going to be presented by my Director of Special Examinations and Technology, Brian Lykins. You may know Brian from his investigations that he led into things like the League of Cities, the Kentucky Associations of Counties, the Airport Board in Lexington, a whole number of our greatest hits around the state. Brian has been at the forefront, and from that work he's been able to develop a list of recommendations that are there to guarantee effective board governance and to minimize the public's vulnerability to public corruption. So with that, I want to introduce from my staff, Brian Lykins.
Good morning, and I'm glad that you all are here today for the Good Government Summit. I'm also glad this morning to discuss with you effective oversight, good governance, strong financial internal controls, and policies that should benefit the effective use of public funds in each of your organizations. Now, as you heard, the Auditor's Office is responsible for a number of different audits throughout the state. We have audits that are conducted in all 120 counties. We audit state government. We also perform information technology and security system and database audits, which some of you all may not be aware of, but we have a strong presence and a dedicated staff that deals in those issues as well. We also look at performance audits and develop strategies on how agencies can perform their work in a more effective manner or meet their goals in a more effective manner. But one of the issues that I want to talk to you about today is, in addition to all of those, we also perform special examinations, and that's in a number of different organizations. Almost any organization that you can think of that receives significant public funds, we've had a special examination of that type of organization. State and local government agencies, special districts, school districts, quasi-government organizations, and a host of others. Now, special examinations differ from a financial audit, in that a financial audit is to determine whether or not the opinion on the financial statements is presented fairly, if the transactions are recorded and classified correctly. But with the special examination, what we look for are specific instances of potential fraud, abuse, or other questionable activity. And I'm sorry to say there is no shortage of activity that we can perform in that area. Our phone rings almost daily, multiple times, with concerns or questions about activity in particular organizations. We've had a score of special examinations, and you've heard a few of those from our state auditor that have been performed. Some of the more recent ones are the former administration of the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. Several of you all are probably familiar with that particular examination and the outcome and ramifications associated with that. Also, various school districts. I think it's important to mention that for the first time, the State Auditor's Office has a very clear presence in school districts, looking at potential corruption, abuse, waste of funds, other allegations of fraud and misappropriation of monies. And we continue that. We have actually completed 14 examinations in different school districts with a number of different issues that have been addressed. Referrals made to the FBI and the Attorney General's office because of issues that came up in at least 2 of those examinations. But we also currently have an ongoing presence in the Jefferson County Public School System, which is the largest in the state. $1.2 billion budget that we're looking at. And so we're looking at a number of issues there, and we anticipate at some point next year we will have an examination that addresses any issues that we have to report there. That's a little bit different. We don't have specific allegations of fraud or issues, but we're looking at that as a request to see if there's more efficiencies that we can develop or ways to use funds better to ensure the funds get to the classroom. Other examinations we've conducted are in various special districts. 3 come to mind: Garrett Fire District, Sanitation District 1 here in northern Kentucky, and also Metropolitan Sewer District. You will hear from the new executive director later today of the Metropolitan Sewer District to talk about the impact and the outcome of the special examination and how, as a result of that, the recommendations that were made, they have really restructured the organization and rebuilt that with new controls and new processes to make that a much stronger organization. So at the end of the tunnel, even though there are things that are identified in our special examinations, the goal is to make that organization a better, stronger organization, and I think we can see time and time again where that's actually occurred. We recently released an examination of Health First Bluegrass, located in Lexington, and then you've heard of Lexington Bluegrass Airport, Kentucky Association of Counties, and Kentucky League of Cities. Now, these examinations are being performed during a time when resources are increasingly tight, and the old statement that every dollar counts isn't just a slogan anymore, and we know that because we live it every day. We're asked to perform more services because there's more needs, and to expand the services that we provide with dwindling resources. And I think that's something that all of us have in common, no matter what organization that we're associated with. Special examinations as a result of this have focused new attention on the need for public and nonprofit organizations to train their board members, especially regarding legal and fiduciary responsibilities. Let me just share one anecdote with you. When we were auditing one organization, a large multi-million-dollar organization, you would recognize it as soon as I said it. The executive director of that organization and the board chair were asked to come and testify before a legislative committee hearing to find out what had gone wrong and what they were going to do to address the issues identified in our report. As a result of that, the board chair, he was the mayor of one of our cities, testified, and she was very clearly spoken. And she didn't try to pull any punches with the legislature. She said, I have sat on 66 boards. I have chaired a number of those boards, including this one. And until this examination came out and I read the recommendations, I had no idea what it truly meant to be a board member for an organization. That was somewhat startling to me because this was an accomplished woman, a lot of responsibility, and yet she said no one had ever taken the time to truly train her as to what it meant to be a board member for an organization. It's imperative that board members understand their responsibilities, especially their legal and fiduciary responsibilities. When you talk about legal and fiduciary responsibilities to board members at times, I get a somewhat glazed look and they say, you mean there are legal responsibilities associated with this function? Yes, and there are enforceable legal ramifications associated with your actions if you don't live up to the standards of your fiduciary responsibilities. Also, as board members and management, you need to ensure that there are strong policies, internal controls, and procedures that are in place and that have been implemented and are consistently functioning. Controls and procedures, internal controls, I'm an auditor, I understand those things, I get excited about those things. I also recognize that very few people in the world do. Those are the types of things that people's eyes kind of glaze over. But in the examinations that we performed, and some of the examples I gave, and a host of others, as we got into the examination and the board members and management saw the need for these controls and the outcome and the ramifications of not having them in place, their eyes weren't glazed over anymore. They were calling us and asking for assistance in how to implement controls that are strong, asking for training, asking for seminars such as this so that people could be encouraged to get involved in those types of activities in their business. And then also, boards must improve their oversight. There's a lot of reasons that I've been given when I interview board members as to why individuals became board members. Well, my friend asked me to. It's something that I thought would be good on a resume. It's a very socially active board. How many of those are really the right reason for joining a board? Hands? Anybody? None, really. You join a board to facilitate the activity of that organization and make contributions that you have through your own skill sets in order to be able to lead that organization as it should be. And we must have stronger board oversight and governance. Now, there's a list of words on the screen before you, and I want to read those to you in just a second. But I want you to think, clear your mind for just a second, and think of how these particular words may be associated. All right? In a smaller group, I asked people to yell out and to provide me examples. This is a large crowd, so I'll share with you some of the examples I've heard before. All right, you ready? Here's the list. First class and overseas travel, exotic vacations, 5-star luxury hotels, expensive liquor and gourmet meals, shopping sprees, firearms, strip clubs, escort services, abuse of power, deception, hundreds of thousands of dollars made in cash payouts. Now, I can see by the expression on your face you have some ideas of how these may be related. One of the most interesting ones that I heard was from a gentleman one time on the right-hand side of the room, and I never was able to place it. I just hoped it wasn't the financial officer of the organization that was being represented there. But they yelled out and said, it sounds like the lifestyle I'd like to live. Well, you know what? I've come to find out that there's several people that may agree with that. Because we have found in a number of issues where people have actually partaken of those types of issues. What holds those different words, those different items together, the thread that associates each one of them, each one of those items is associated with finding or findings that we've identified in our audits. These aren't items that are made up. These are items that we have thought about that could potentially happen. Each one of those items you can find in some way or another throughout our examination reports. As a result of that, we developed 32 recommendations that were common themes or policy areas that could be identified as opportunities for organizations, agencies, boards to strengthen their policies, to get more involved, to provide stronger governance. And so today I want to share with you a few of those. We certainly don't have time to talk about all 32, but I want to highlight a few of those to you and provide some real examples of what occurred in organizations that we examined that led to us making this recommendation. Okay? As we start off the 32 recommendations, you see up on the screen an introductory statement. We implemented these recommendations as a result of our examinations and findings and different themes that we had in our examinations. But it's really to assist the boards in providing appropriate financial oversight, to aid them in doing their job better. Now, these are just a brief summary of policy areas that should be explored. And one document doesn't fit every organization. We recognize that. But study the document. I've left several of the 32 recommendations, the list of them, in the back, on the back table. You can also find them on our website at www.auditor.ky.gov. And so they're readily available for your use. And scores of people have used these to help their organizations. But evaluate them. See which ones apply to your organization, and then thoughtfully develop a policy that addresses that particular issue. All right? We recognize that boards don't run the day-to-day operation of an organization. That's where sometimes there's some conflict between executive management and the board. Where is that line? We recognize there is a fine line, but boards do provide the parameters, the policies that govern the activity of those that work in the organization. Right? Okay, that's their role and function, and they're to make sure that those are consistently applied. I have had people say, you know what, that is so restrictive. After examinations and after talking to a broader group, I've had scores of employees come and say, it's not restrictive, it's liberating, because now I know where the boundaries are. Now I know what I can do, what the appropriate process is, how I should conduct my activity, and still stay within the boundaries of what I'm supposed to accomplish and how I'm supposed to accomplish that. So I encourage you to look at each of the 32 recommendations. The first one that I want to describe to you is that the board should have a well-defined, clear mission statement. That mission statement should encompass or encapsulate all the operational plans, resource allocations that further that organization. What are your goals? What are your objectives for that organization? I had one person raise their hand and they say, mission statement? Really? Now we recognize these are somewhat fundamental. Many of the recommendations are fundamental building blocks to good governance and controls. But we also recognize that we found over and over again in multi-million-dollar organizations with well-educated, well-principled professional boards and executive staff, they didn't have these processes in place, and they suffered as a result of it. So we encourage you to look at it, even if your organization is a large organization, multifaceted. But what we found as we looked at this, we said, no, it's not antiquated. It keeps the focus of the employees on the mission of the organization. And your mission should never be antiquated. If you need to revise your mission statement, revise the mission statement, but keep it vital to your organization. Time and time again, we have seen employees put away the values of the mission statement and replace it with a culture of self-entitlement and what can I get out of the organization, instead of what can I put into this organization that is going to make it better, that is going to allow it to strive and serve more people. And what we need to do is have that mission statement that keeps the focus before everybody on exactly what their functions are. I want to share one story with you about this. I was auditing or examining one particular organization that was really a very well-run, well-operated organization. But I told them when we met with the chief executives at the end of the examination, and there was the chief financial officer, the attorney, the internal auditor, the executive director, that type of crowd was in the room. And I said, you know, the one thing I noticed is I couldn't find a statement about your mission. Your mission should be important to you. And I was interrupted and said, oh no, you don't understand. Our mission is all throughout this organization. Well, I felt very small at that point because I thought, well, the very first item I mentioned, apparently I'm wrong. And I've missed that. And I said, well, share with me, being the auditor, not taking someone's word for it. I said, show me where that is. Well, it's on the back of our business cards. It's on our website. And one of the attorney, I think, was said, my gosh, when you walk through the lobby, it is in big, bold print in the lobby, painted on the side of the lobby wall. Well, I felt even smaller at that point, and they said, here's a business card. They held up a business card, they turned it over, and guess what was on the back of that business card? Anybody? Nothing. It wasn't on the back of the business card anymore. They were somewhat baffled, contacted the person in charge of that, and they said, remember, we were trying to cut back costs. It cost more money than we had anticipated. So we don't have that on the back of the business card anymore. Said, oh, okay, the internal auditor, being a good auditor, as we typically are, was taking notes on the laptop and said, here, I pulled up the website. I'll let you look at the website. I said, great. Said, it's right here on the, let me call our IT person. They said, well, don't you remember about 18 months ago we redesigned that web page? And at the end of that process, we couldn't really decide where to put this because there was so much really valuable information we wanted to put out there. So we never really put the mission statement back on the web page. It wasn't there. We walked around to the lobby. There was a wall similar to that, a nice beige color, painted very nicely. But guess what was not on that wall? We saw no wording whatsoever. And I looked over and all of them were standing like this, just kind of in amazement. And the receptionist heard us talking. They said, are you all talking about those words that used to be up there? Those phrases? I said, yes. And she said, well, about 2 years ago, we painted over that wall. And that hasn't been there for some time. I tell you this story not as a cute anecdote, but because it is so easy every day to get accustomed to your environment, to get accustomed to those subtle changes that occur and never notice that they're actually happening. It's so easy to walk through there. They walk through that lobby every workday to their office, and they swore, and they were convicted and believed that their mission statement was on that wall. I encourage you to make sure that you look at your organization with fresh eyes. Don't become complacent. Don't let things subtly creep in that you hadn't really noticed. Notice what's going on. Notice if there's subtle changes. Notice if there's a change in your employees. If there's something going on that you really hadn't noticed. Because these subtle changes can creep in, and before long, you're like those people that thought their mission statement was all through their organization and it had dropped off from that. So I encourage you to do that. Another very important recommendation that we made is to facilitate the development of an annual orientation program and a manual wherein significant information can be placed in that manual for your board members and be updated routinely. We hear two things from board members usually when it comes to information that comes from the organization. We get almost nothing, which obviously is bad, where we get so much we never can keep track of it, and that's equally as bad. Help your board members understand or take the responsibility as a board member yourself, how to organize that information, when to update it. Give them an opportunity or a tool to do that with. It's important that that orientation have structure to it, that you look at how the organization is operated, you understand the financial activities, the presentation of the financial activities, your financial position at that point in time. Make sure that you have the bylaws discussed, any statutes or regulations relating to the board. The financial audit, provide the latest financial audit to your board members so they can get acclimated. We also recommend that the orientation be provided by a third party, a knowledgeable, well-informed third party. Now there's reasons for that. One of the reasons for that is typically what we see when we hear from boards or management. Yes, we have an orientation process. What we see is that it consists of a meeting between the top executive usually and the new board member. They come in, they have a 15-minute, 20-minute discussion in general. They tour some of the facilities. They may meet some hand-selected employees that will say all the right things, that will shake their hand and smile and talk about what a great job management's doing. And then they have a fabulous lunch. I have asked board member after board member, what do you remember most about your orientation? Do you know what they've said? To a great extent, I remember the lunch. It was a great lunch. That is not what they should remember about the orientation. Have a strong orientation process. The reason that it should be facilitated by an outside party is because it is important that a board member receive unbiased information and that they receive robust, full information about their legal responsibilities, their fiduciary duties, and the types of things that they should be monitoring as a board member. If it's conducted by a member of management, and if that management isn't as forthright and have the integrity that they should, they may not share everything with the board member that should be shared. So you end up getting a very dumbed down or a very diluted process in that orientation. Look at your orientation process. Another recommendation is that the board should ensure that during the board meetings there is enough flexibility within your structure where you call on different individuals for information. Time and time again, we have seen issues where there is a board meeting, all the chief or top executive management appear, but the only person that speaks is the person that's the chief executive. Sometimes that's by design because he's told the others to sit back quietly, to be there and to be supportive, and when he speaks, nod. We've actually had statements like that. But as a board member, call on different people within their areas, the executive director over your personnel or your payroll clerk. Call on your financial director to give information to you directly. Don't rely on one point of view that may not want certain items to be shared. One of the reasons that is so important is on several occasions we had people tell us as we were interviewing them, when we started hearing horrific issues with fraudulent expenditures and abuse and waste and just a number of things, conflicts of interest. I said, why didn't you ever tell anybody? They said, I would have. I remember one lady sat straight up in her chair and she said, I would have. But you know what? Nobody ever asked. And I didn't have an opportunity to go around my boss until somebody asked me. As board members, get involved, get engaged, ask appropriate questions, and ask it from a variety of individuals. They would have shared that in a number of cases, I think. Had that information been shared at the appropriate time, things would not have escalated to where there were criminal referrals and other referrals, and management was replaced, either resigned or replaced. Another significant recommendation, and I really think that a large percentage of the issues that came to our office, and maybe even made it to the press and out into the public, would never occur if this particular recommendation was followed. Should have an independent process to receive, analyze, investigate, and resolve even anonymous concerns. Typically what we find is that if there is a concern in the organization, where is that concern addressed? To your supervisor. If it's not resolved there, then it goes to the next level of supervision. Finally, it goes to the head of the agency, right? What we have seen is what happens if the concern relates to the management that you're supposed to provide the concern to. Do you know where that goes? It goes nowhere. That's why a number of times people look outside their organization. They come to our office, they go to other agencies, they go to law enforcement or the press and say, I can't take this anymore, I want somebody to address this issue. And so as a result of that, others get involved, issues that have already escalated come to play, and there's a number of issues that have to be addressed by the organization. Make sure your employees know that as a public employee, they're protected by KRS 61102, and there can't be retaliation associated with that, and ensure there's a clear whistleblower policy in your organization that makes sure that those employees that come forth with information are protected. All right. Another recommendation. If you see the numbers on the recommendations, you'll see aren't in order because I have selected them from the 32. The board should adopt a code of ethics that includes standards of conduct for its board members, its officers, its management, and all of its employees. We have seen several times where really there's a good ethics policy in place, but it only applies to the employees, not the executive staff and not the board members. We have also seen times where the ethics policy is woefully inadequate. It should address things such as standards of ethical conduct, confidentiality, conflicts of interest, nepotism, gifts, honoraria. A number of things that should be addressed in those particular areas must be viewed and ensured that they're addressed by the agency. All right? Let me give you just a couple of stories. Our time's running short, and I've got a lot more I want to share with you. I want to share a story with you. What do you think about an individual whose primary function is to procure a service of a large organization to perform multi-$100,000 contract for the organization? Some of the primary business of this organization is sent to a third party. The individual goes through a process, not really a prescribed process because this organization didn't have policies in place on how to procure certain services and things. They do now, but they didn't at that time. They procure this service, then the individual takes on an individual contract with this same company and is paid approximately $50,000 annually to be a consultant to this organization that they just hired to run the business and the operation of the organization that person is supposed to oversee. Not only does that happen, but this executive director also has a company in which they're a partner, and that company enters into a contract with the third-party provider. How can you possibly oversee that organization? Make sure you're getting the best rate, they're performing the rate of the information or the job that they should, if you have those types of conflicts. Other conflicts exist as well. Another organization hired a third-party provider, and within just a few weeks, 3 members of the individual that hired the third-party provider, 3 members of his family was now employed by that third-party provider. All of a sudden, he and other members of the organization were given free trips for a week, or sometimes longer, to a nice southern Caribbean island, where all expenses were paid by that vendor. Also rented a house, or not a house, but a business, a building, from the wife of the person that gave him the contract. The conflicts went on and on and on. That was almost a $600,000 contract. They didn't even have a contract in place. There were no terms or conditions. It hadn't been reviewed by the board. It hadn't been reviewed by the attorney. So serious issues that need to be addressed. Look at your conflict of interest statement and make sure it's robust enough. The next one, boards should ensure that they define clearly and document all employee benefits in a fair and equitable manner. If there's taxable results of that, taxable issues should be addressed appropriately. See, a number of times where tax issues were not addressed appropriately, and there's taxable benefits that should have been accrued to that individual's income, and they weren't. In this particular area, one executive alone was given memberships to sports clubs, theater memberships that were out of state, at least one of them were out of state, dinner clubs, international organizations, gymnasium memberships, multiple gymnasium memberships, and the list went on and on. Over $36,000 annually was provided in dues or fees for memberships for this one employee. Do you know how the board knew about that? They read about it in our examination because they had no idea that these types of benefits were being provided to their employees. It's another story, but they also had no idea what they were paying their executives as well. And that leads me to this one. The board should approve a compensation package of the organization's primary executive and be aware of the compensation provided to other executive staff. We have had on multiple occasions executive directors that made in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, benefits that most people could only dream of, and the board members were not aware of what the members were compensated. Not only were they not aware of the compensation, they also had no idea what the compensation was based on. Understand, as an executive, make sure your board knows what you're making. So if there's any questions, if there's any concern, they can ask you then instead of after the fact, and they can say, well, gee, we never knew. I wonder how that occurred. If there's a compensation study that's done, understand the compensation criteria that is applied. One individual was making hundreds of thousands of dollars, was more in a regional company, providing more local and regional services, and yet the salary comps that were being used in the compensation study were for national and international businesses located in Chicago and Los Angeles and organizations like that. There was no comparison, and yet that was the basis on which they were providing the compensation. Understand how that's done. Document it. If you're going to provide, if you have a contract employee, every benefit, every salary increase, all of those things need to be clearly spelled out in the contract. And if I'm an executive, if I'm not on the board side, I'm on the executive side, I would demand it because I never want anybody to question what I'm receiving. I want to be very clear about that. All right? Just a couple and wrapping up. A transparent, competitive selection process for the procurement of goods and services. There are organizations that do not have policies for procurement. They do not have procedures on how to procure. We recently looked at one organization, and by statute, they were supposed to follow certain procurement procedures. They ended up doing it right. When we went through the process with the individual that was doing it, she kept arguing with us and saying, no, that's not right. I do it this way. And finally, what we realized is that, and at her own volition, she said, oh, I've made a mistake. The mistake she made caused her to do it correctly. She had typically been procuring goods and services out of compliance with regulations and statute for as long as she had been employed there. Make sure your employees are trained. It's not good enough just to have the policies in place. They have to understand how to implement them. So provide sufficient training. Review budget to actual expenses. Get enough information in your financial review. First, get the financial reviews as board members. Have those financial reviews. Review that information. And one particular story I'll share with you. Individual board met, they were creating the budget. The marketing budget had been overexpended by $30,000. It was originally $90,000. It went to $120,000. What did the board do? Did they ask questions? Did they look at what has been achieved, the goals of the marketing, how successful it was? No. They increased the budget by $30,000. The next year, the budget was exceeded again by $30,000. All right? It went from $90,000 to $120,000. The third year, it went from $120,000 to $150,000. And what we found out is the marketing budget was actually, that was being used, was actually only a fraction of that. The travel and expense budgets had been blown out of the water so much they were afraid somebody may ask questions about that. So they started recording travel expenses as marketing expenses. The marketing director said, had anybody asked me at the board why my budget was so high, I would have had an opportunity to tell them what was going on, but they never asked. Make sure you look at the budget and you understand the figures. Make inquiries, do analysis of those numbers. If they don't make sense, find out why. My time is up. I want to close with one particular slide. Number 23, credit cards. Your all's organizations have credit cards. If credit cards are not managed appropriately, that can be a very high-risk transaction. Organization after organization, the management there, executive directors there, and at times the board members there. The credit card transactions had no business purpose. They were excessive. They were for personal use. Nobody was approving the transactions and nobody was tracking the activity. Let me just share a few of the items and we'll wrap up. For personal use, breathalyzers that were purchased by employees so that they could use them throughout the workday to check out their own condition and make sure that they were all right during the day. Shotguns, artwork, clothing, exercise equipment that was delivered to the employee's house, purchased on credit cards. Gift cards that were given to female friends of an individual and provided to them for whatever use they wanted. Fireworks, meals, tobacco, little items that should have come out of the personal individual's own funds. Strip clubs, escort services. One organization was having a conference at 1:23 in the morning. They call it escort service. The escort appears and provides whatever service the escorts provide. And so the organization paid for that activity. One strip club charge alone was $4,200. Although I guess they were some conscious of the fact that that was paid for with public funds, because the individuals involved actually negotiated the price down, we found out when we investigated, from a much higher dollar amount. So I guess in some respect they were being thrifty with their public funds. But these are concerns. Make sure that the executive director and the executive management's credit card activity and reimbursement requests are reviewed by the board. You cannot ask a subordinate employee to review their bosses, the head of the organization's financial activity. If you do, it's going to be all right every time. Saw an executive director where they tore the tops off of the receipts. You couldn't tell for the receipt, the date of the receipt, when it was available, or when it was the item was procured, if it was even associated with the organization. I think you get the idea of a number of issues. I want to close with the fact that when you also have a policy in place and you say that an employee must pay back personal expenses, make sure you put a time frame in your policy as to when that's to occur. We went to the CFO of an organization that is supposed to be responsible for ensuring that those policies are in place, are effective. We thought it was going to be difficult because he had several $1,000s worth of personal purchases up to 4, 5, 6 years old that had never been paid back. He was very comfortable when we talked to him and said, I don't see the problem. So, well, you didn't pay these back? He said, you haven't read our policy. I said, I think I have. He said, you're to pay these back. He said, oh, it never says when I'm going to pay these back. He said, when I have enough money and I have the information, I'll pay them back, but until then, I'm not required to because my policy doesn't require me to pay it back within any specific time frame. As we close, just keep in mind that board members must focus on their mission. They must receive a proper orientation, ensure policies, including ethics policies, are in place, and consistently review the financial statements and provide oversight. Don't be guilty of just being on a social club. Be there to facilitate the activity of your organization, and most every one of you are. Most every one of the people we deal with try to do that. But there are those that don't take that responsibility seriously. Thank you very much.